These sessions are based on the book The Messiah Codes Unsealed.
Hi, this is Luis once more. Welcome to the Messiah Codes. This is session 8, The Mystery of the Third Temple, part 1. God said in Psalms 25:2, "It's the glory of God to conceal a matter, but the glory of kings is to search out a matter." The purpose of the following sessions is to search out a matter and see whether the Bible gives us enough information regarding the Third Temple so that we can calculate when it will be dedicated. We read in the book of Daniel, chapter 1, verse 2, that he understood by the books the number of the years specified by the word of the Lord through Jeremiah the prophet, that he would accomplish 70 years in the desolations of Jerusalem. What did Daniel mean by that? Because of confusion with other prophecies by Jeremiah, the general understanding is that Daniel was talking about a 70-year long exile and a 70-year period during which the land was not tilled, I guess because they were exiled. We're going to prove that the 70 years Daniel was referring to was 70 years without the temple. Once we establish that, we will search out the matter and see the prophecies that tells us on what year the third temple will be dedicated and possibly on what day the dedication will be celebrated. Actually, we will see that the closest we can get is to a range of 2 consecutive days. We will begin today by reading a group of prophecies in the book of Leviticus, chapter 26. A bit of information about Leviticus. The book of Leviticus focuses on the ceremonial law, the statutes for the proper job of the Kohanim. Those are the priests, the descendants of Kohath, the second son of Levi. For instance, Moses, Aaron, and Miriam were Kohanim. Israel had Levi, Levi had Kohath, Kohath had Amram, and Amram had Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. The name of Leviticus in Hebrew is Vaikra. That means he called, which are the first words in the book. Vaikra el Moshe, and called to Moses. Leviticus also goes over the other themes, like the instructions for the steps of the harvest, Leviticus 19, 9 through 10, that are also prophetic as to the harvest of the end times, and many other prophecies. Also, before starting this session, I would like to repeat that when analyzing prophecy, in some cases, God gives us the exact day and even the second of the prophecy, when a prophecy will be fulfilled. But in other cases, we find that the prophetic calculation gets us to a time frame of 2 consecutive days. This phenomenon occurs on the prophecies related to the fall festivals, which are all yet to be fulfilled. And again, we will observe that to calculate the date within 2 consecutive days of the temple's dedications is going to be a little complex, but the year of the dedication is clear. So let's begin. Let's go to Leviticus 26, where God explains to Israel the blessings of obedience and the consequences of disobedience. We read in Leviticus 26, 1 through 13, and these are excerpts. "If you walk in my statutes and you keep my commands and you do them, then I will give you rains in their time, and the land shall give its produce, and the trees of the field shall give their fruit. And I will put my dwelling place in your midst, and my inner self shall not abhor you. And I will walk about in your midst, and I shall be your God, and you shall be my people." Then we continue in verses 14 through 17. These are excerpts. "But if you do not listen to me, and you do not carry out all these commands, and if you reject my statutes, and if your inner self abhors my regulations, do not carry out all my commands by your breaking my covenant, I in turn will do this to you. Then I will summon into you horror, and I will set my face against you." The Lord gives more specific details of the consequence of Israel's disobedience in 2 Chronicles 7, 19, and 20. We read, but if you turn away and forsake my statutes and my commandments, which I have set before you, and go and serve other gods, and worship them, I will uproot them from my land which I have given them, and this house which I have sanctified for my name I will cast out of my sight, and will make it a proverb and a byword among all peoples. So according to 2 Chronicles 7:19 and 20, as punishment for Israel's disobedience, God will uproot them from my land which I have given them, so they would be exiled. And this house which I have sanctified for my name, I will cast out of my sight, and will make it a proverb and a byword among all peoples. There will be no temple. During the punishment for Israel's disobedience, the Lord will make his house a proverb and a byword among all peoples. In other words, there will be no physical temple, only its memory. On this session, we will clarify the matter of the desolations of Jerusalem. If that is not solved, it makes it almost impossible to understand the prophecies that give us the year and possibly even the exact time of the dedication of the third temple down to a time frame of 2 consecutive days. The first matter to be clarified is Jeremiah's 70-year prophecies. Yes, there were 2 prophecies about the 70 years, and whether either one prophesied a 70-year exile for Israel. There was an exile for Israel, and not for 70 years. That is not what Jeremiah prophesied. Again, once these prophecies are clarified, we will be able to understand what are the desolations of Jerusalem. I'm praying that the Lord gives me wisdom to explain the subject matter clearly, because I'm going to write things that will contradict the current position of most experts regarding the exile of Jerusalem in Babylon. The general belief is that the punishment for Jerusalem's disobedience was a 70-year-long exile during which the land was not tilled. On these videos, we will go deep into the subject, but if you want to go even deeper, check out the book. We will prove using the Bible and history that there was an exile, but it was not for 70 years. Those were not the 70 years of desolation prophesied by Jeremiah. What Jeremiah prophesied for Jerusalem was 70 years without the temple. We must clarify this because the current position again is wrong and impedes our understanding of one of the most important and soon to occur prophecies in the Old Testament. Remember, the rule is believe what you read, don't read what you believe. This is going to be a long subject to develop and will require that you lean in and pay close attention. I will try to eliminate the most academic parts, which will be found in the book The Messiah Codes Unsealed, but it will be inevitable not to get someone historical and technical when developing this subject. Those that want to get deeper into the subject can read the book. This session begins with Daniel chapter 9 verses 1 and 2, when the prophet describes an important revelation regarding the 70-year-long desolations of Jerusalem as prophesied by Jeremiah. So he says, in the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, of the lineage of the Medes, who was made king over the realm of the Chaldeans. In the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, understood by the books the number of the years specified by the word of the Lord through Jeremiah the prophet, that he would accomplish 70 years in the desolations of Jerusalem. So we see that between 539 and 538 BC, Cyrus of Persia orders the reconstruction of the temple, and Daniel understands the 70 years of Jerusalem's desolation. By the way, don't confuse Darius the Mede, who was made king by Cyrus the Great over the realm of the Chaldeans in 539 BC, with Darius the Great, who ruled all of the Mede-Persian Empire from 522 BC to 486 BC. Darius the Mede came to power in Babylon the same year that Cyrus the Great ordered the construction of the Second Temple and also ended the Jewish exile in Babylon. That was 539 BC. Remember that there was an exile for Jerusalem, but it was not for 70 years. Why do people believe that Jeremiah prophesied a 70-year exile? Let's explore the prophecies. Let's read in Jeremiah 25:11. It says, "And this whole land shall be a desolation and an astonishment, as in a waste. And these nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. Which nations? These are the nations surrounding Jerusalem: Aram, Samaria, which is Israel, Ammon, Moab, Edom, Philistine, Phoenicia, etc. All were taken by Assyria and the Babylonians afterwards, including 46 walled cities of Judah, except Jerusalem. By the time Babylon conquered Assyria in 609 BC, all those nations were already territory conquered by Assyria, except Jerusalem. Let's review what happened and why Jerusalem was not taken. In 701 BC, after conquering the other 45 cities of Judah, 2 Kings 18:13, the Assyrian king Sennacherib tried to conquer Jerusalem and exile its inhabitants to other lands, 2 Kings 18:32. Sennacherib threatened that if Jerusalem didn't surrender to him, it would be completely destroyed, 2 Kings 18:28-30. He even mocked God, telling the inhabitants of Jerusalem that just like the gods of other nations could not stop him, the God of Hezekiah, the king of Judah, would not save them either, 2 Kings 19:10-13. Hezekiah looked for God's guidance, and God told him through the prophet Isaiah that the Assyrians would leave without even shooting an arrow, 2 Kings 19:32-34. So we read the historical record. This is Sennacherib's prism and me in the Oriental Institute at the University of Chicago. We read in the prism of Sennacherib that after showing the splendor of his armies to the inhabitants of Jerusalem, he just decided to go back to Nineveh, where he died later, like the Bible prophesied. Can you imagine moving all those armies, conquering all the cities around, getting to Jerusalem, going like, look at the splendor of my armies. Okay, pretty cool. So I'm just going to leave now. Of course not. So previous Assyrian kings before Sennacherib, and now Sennacherib, conquered all the nations around Jerusalem, including almost all Judah. And after mobilizing a huge army against Jerusalem, he decides to just show off his armies and then immediately go back to Nineveh. What really caused Sennacherib to run back to Nineveh without even shooting an arrow? We read in 2 Kings 19:7, "Look, I, God, am putting in him," Sennacherib, "a spirit. He will hear a rumor and return to his land. Then I will cause him to fall by the sword in his land." The Bible explains that the angel of the Lord killed overnight 185,000 of the Assyrian soldiers camping in front of Jerusalem, and that's why they left, 2 Kings 19:35. I can imagine Sennacherib receiving the news of his dead soldiers, asking, "What happened?" And then hearing the rumor, it was an angel. How do you fight an angel? So, like he wrote in his prism, he just left. So, between 868 and 668 BC, according to the Encyclopedia Britannica, Assyria conquers the nations all around except Jerusalem. Although Jerusalem was not taken by Assyria, it ended up agreeing to pay tribute, which was like a tax, gold and silver, as a way to keep the Assyrians from trying to invade again. That is the reason why, by the time Nabopolassar, the king of Babylon, conquered Assyria in 609 BC, he also took over all the nations around except for Jerusalem. After Assyria fell to Babylon in 609 BC, in the Battle of Haran, Pharaoh Necho, an ally of Assyria, entered Jerusalem in 608 BC and ordered the tribute now to be paid to him, and installed Joachim as king, the new king of Jerusalem, 2 Kings 23:31-35. So again, between 608 and 609 and 608 BC, Babylon conquers Assyria and the nations after the Battle of Haran. In 608 BC, Pharaoh Necho now takes the tribute from Jerusalem. Then, in 605 BC, after the leftovers of the Assyrian armies and Pharaoh Necho were defeated in the Battle of Carchemish, and after the death of Nabopolassar, Nebuchadnezzar, his son, went to Jerusalem and took over the tribute payments that were previously going to Pharaoh Necho and before that to the Assyrians. Jerusalem was mostly left alone, just like it was left alone under the Assyrians and under Pharaoh Necho. Nebuchadnezzar entered, even left Jehoiakim as king, and the temple was untouched, and the land continued to be tilled. But he took some articles from the temple. Now let's go to the parts from Jeremiah 25, 1 to 14, relevant to the argument. But please go to the Bible and read the whole passage by yourself. It's super interesting. So let's read Jeremiah 25, 1. The word came to Jeremiah concerning all the people of Judah in the 4th year of Joachim, son of Josiah, king of Judah, which was the 1st year of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. This is 605 BC. Remember that Jerusalem was not taken, but all the other walled cities in Judah were taken because they previously fell to the Assyrians. And when the Assyrians were conquered by the Babylonians, they became part of the Babylonian Empire. Let's continue and clarify Jeremiah 25, 9 through 11. This is super important, right? Please notice that I will use letters in parentheses to help separate and correlate the subjects in the verses. The verses talk about 3 peoples. A, the people of the north and Nebuchadnezzar. B, the land and its inhabitants, that's Jerusalem. And C, the nations around it. So we read, I will summon all the peoples of the north and my servant Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. A, declares the Lord, and I will bring them, A, against this land and its inhabitants, B, Jerusalem, and against all the surrounding nations, C. I will completely destroy them, B, and make them, B, an object of horror and scorn and an everlasting ruin. I will banish from them the sound of joy and gladness, the voices of bride and bridegroom, the sound of millstone, and the light of the lamp. This whole country, B, will become a desolate wasteland, and this nation, C, will serve the king of Babylon 70 years. These verses clearly prophesy that Nebuchadnezzar would bring complete destruction and desolation, and the question is whether it was prophesied for both, the nations and Jerusalem, or for one of them. It was obviously prophesied only for Jerusalem, the land and its inhabitants, since Jerusalem was completely destroyed in 586 BC, but all the nations around Jerusalem were not. But I can hear someone say, but Luis, what about the Philistine city of Ascalon? Wasn't it also completely destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar in 604 BC? Good question. We know it's Jerusalem and not Ascalon because God said through Jeremiah in verse 10, I will banish from them, B, the sound of joy and gladness, the voices of bride and bridegroom. And then we read in Jeremiah 33 about the restoration of Jerusalem. Thus says the Lord, again there shall be heard in this place, Jerusalem, the voice of joy and the voice of gladness, the voice of the bridegroom and the voice of the bride, which is what God took away from Jerusalem in Jeremiah 31:10. The next question is, who was going to serve Babylon for 70 years? Jerusalem, the land and its inhabitants, or the nations, or both? The answer is obvious. It's historical fact that the nations around Jerusalem, previously conquered by Assyria, served Babylon for 70 years starting in 609 BC after the Battle of Haran when Assyria fell to Babylon until 539 BC when Babylon was conquered by Cyrus the Great of Persia. So the 70 years that the nation served Babylon was from 609 BC when Assyria fell to Babylon to 539 BC when the Medo-Persians, again King Cyrus, took over Babylon. This is historical fact. Those are 70 years. It's also a historical fact that in 605 BC, when Nebuchadnezzar entered Jerusalem, he left it untouched. There was no exile until 597 BC, Jeremiah 29, 1 and 2, when a first and partial exile occurred. Jerusalem and the first temple were completely destroyed in 586 BC, and that is when we find a complete exile in 586 BC. And about 8 months after the fall of Jerusalem, the land was finally not tilled anymore. So the land was tilled until 8 months after the fall of Jerusalem. So it couldn't be 70 years because it will be contradicting the Bible. You read that in 2 Kings 25, 12 through 26. But most important, there was no temple to do sacrifices to atone for sin until the second temple was dedicated in 516 BC, 70 years later. So again, 586 it gets destroyed, 70 years later is dedicated in the year 516, the second temple. So again, in 597 BC, it was the first revolt of Jerusalem. It ends with a partial exile to Babylon, right? So those are about 58 years from the partial exile on 597 BC to when Cyrus the Great from Persia takes over Babylon and releases the Jews from their exile. And in 586 BC, Jerusalem and the first temple are destroyed by Babylon, and there's a full exile at that point. Then in 516 BC, after 70 years, the second temple is dedicated. These biblical and historical facts confirm the two prophecies of Jeremiah. There are 70 years declared for Babylon during which the nations will serve it, and there will be 70 years of desolation for Jerusalem for during those years there was no temple. This gets further confirmed as we read other passages in the Bible. Believe what you read. We will analyze other passages and we will get the same answers, namely that what is biblically and historically proven is that there was an exile, but it was not for 70 years. It was for around 58 years. That's if you count from the first partial exile in 597 BC. Therefore, a 70-year exile was not the punishment or the desolations of Jerusalem that Jeremiah prophesied. Again, there were two 70-year prophecies given by Jeremiah, both of them biblically and historically factual. There were 70 years determined for Babylon during which the nations all around Jerusalem served it, from 609 BC to 539 BC, and there was a 70-year-long punishment for Jerusalem, and the punishment was 70 years without the temple and without the presence of God on the land, from 586 BC to 516 BC. If there was no temple, then there was no atonement for sin. So those are the 70 years of the desolations of Jerusalem, from 586 to 516 BC, no temple. In our next class, we will explore additional prophecies by Jeremiah that have been misinterpreted to support the mistaken belief on a 70-year Jewish exile in Babylon. Understanding Jeremiah's prophecies will allow us to understand what are the 70 years of the desolations of Jerusalem and ultimately when the third temple will be built. In the next class, we will continue studying the mystery of the dedication of the third temple. See you in the next class.